All right, and I won't. Well, I won't mute you yet. I'll a couple comments and I'll mute everybody.
Ron,
Ron,
I'm
actually,
driving.
I will.
I'm driving, so go ahead and mute me.
All right, I'm gonna go mute people now. Then hold on.
Participants.
Okay. Okay, we have muted everybody. And once again, when the time comes, you want to join the discussion, just unmute yourself and participate. All right, we are continuing in the book of Samuel. We covered in the first semester and the second semester a total of 12 chapters. We are not going to get past more than chapter 17 or 18 this time. So we'll do another 5 or 6 chapters this time. The book of Samuel, the first book of Samuel, has 31 chapters. So obviously we're not going to be able to finish, but we will get through at least the first part of it. We're going to go through the history of the reign of the first king of Israel, King Saul. Saul is the king we were introduced to at the end of last session when we gathered together. And in our discussions today, we are going to trace the overall history of King Saul from the beginning of his reign up until the end, although we won't cover all of the stories in that reign. That will come later when we'll come to the story of King David as well, because the story of King Saul and King David overlap. Saul and David are both anointed kings at the same time. There's a rivalry between them. And we'll come to discuss that probably not this semester, but well, a little this semester and a little thereafter. All right, so first of all, some problems with Saul. We don't have a lot of the information we have about the reign of King Saul is conjectural. We don't have exact dates. If you were to ask me the period of time that Saul lived, it would be between 1050 between 1050 and 1000 BCE, okay? So we can narrow it down to a period of about 50 years. He did not reign any earlier than 1050 BCE, and by 1000 BCE, he had already died and was replaced by King David. If you were to ask me more specifically, can we narrow that gap, the number of years that Saul actually reigned as king? We probably can. Most commentators, both rabbinic and critical commentators, believe that Saul was king of Israel for 20 years. And since we are pretty sure that David began his rule sometime around the year 1000, I think it would be correct to say that Saul reigned for about 20 years from 1020 to 1000 BCE. So that's a reign of about 20 years. Now, the Hebrew Bible, the book of Samuel, is not going to tell you everything that happened during those 20 years. It's only going to tell you about certain incidents because it's drawing a story. And so there's no need to tell you what Saul did each and every year over his 20 years of reign. They're going to telescope it, and they're going to try and describe for you in general detail the major events of Saul's kingship over the 20 years and the pivotal events that resulted in him being deposed as king over Israel and being replaced by the young shepherd named David. So tonight you're going to see that there are some materials we will go over very quickly, other materials we will study at more depth. If you do the readings that are assigned, and hopefully you all received a copy of the syllabus, if you did not receive a copy of the chapters that we are covering, I'll be happy to send additional copies out. By now we have pretty much final copies of all of the people who are in the class. There's about 20 students enrolled in our class this semester. So I will send out both the videos of this session and the follow-up material and initial questions. I'll send that out starting this week. You'll receive it. Those of you who are in the class will receive it on a regular basis. All right, so what do I want to tell you about King Saul? He is a flawed character. Saul is a truly tragic character. What makes him tragic is he had aspects of greatness in his character. There were parts of him that made him an ideal candidate to be the first king of Israel. What makes him tragic is in his that very same personality, there were flaws, there were psychological challenges that caused Saul to lose the kingship and eventually to lose the place of honor he had at the beginning of his rule. Saul is, from a psychological viewpoint, a very, very interesting and complex character. So let me review with you just very briefly what we know about Saul when we left last trimester, what we talked about. You'll remember that the period of the judges gave way to divisions among the tribes of Israel. I told you that the Jewish people recognized that part of their problem was that in the face of stronger and stronger enemies and tribal divisions, they needed a king, they needed a leader who would be able to bring the tribes together, to unify the tribes of Israel and provide a strong central government. Samuel, you'll remember, was the judge and the prophet and the leader who, even against his own inclination, agreed to the people's request and anointed, at their request, anointed Saul to be king over Israel. You'll remember that Samuel, after he chooses Saul to be king, he has this presentation he makes in chapter 12 to the Jewish people, and he says, all right, I have done what you have requested of me. You asked for a king. Even though you were wrong in requesting a king, God has told me to grant your request. This is the man who God has indicated will be your king. And then Samuel ends by saying, but beware, because you're going to see that the result of asking for a human king is not only going to produce advantages and benefits, it's also going to produce some severe consequences later on. And there will come a time when you will cry out and you will regret the fact that you ever asked for a king. And with that, we ended last trimester. Samuel takes his departure from the people. Saul becomes king of Israel. Now, the events that we're going to read about in this week's readings, this is chapters 13 and 14. I don't think we'll get into 15, but 13 and 14 for this week. The two chapters we're going to cover deal in general with the overall span of Saul's reign. They give you a very general view of Saul's reign of 20 years. The Bible, when it presents history, compresses it. It makes it seem like it all happened in a very short period of time. But the truth is, these next two chapters that we're going to read occur over a period of 20 years. So it's going to take us one night to cover 20 years, the reign of Saul. You're going to say, all this happened in 20 years? No, it did not. What the Bible likes to do is it takes all of the accomplishments and he compresses them and makes it seem as if all this took place very quickly. But everything we're going to talk about, the wars of King Saul, which is really what we're talking about this evening, last over a period of 20 years. Saul becomes king in a period of war, and at his death, he dies in war. So Saul's entire reign, his entire kingdom, is spent confronting the enemies of Israel. Saul, as a true king of Israel, unites his people. He brings the tribes together. He does what he can to solve some of the problems that had resulted from the loose tribal confederations of the period before the kingship. But in the end, he is a man who knows battle all of his life. And he, together with all of his sons, will die on a battlefield fighting one of his earliest enemies, the Philistines. We will see that over the course of the next weeks. All right, so let us now look at the chapter. I put it on the screen for you, and we're going to take a look at the book of Saul. We're going to read it, but the problem is that you need to read this. If you looked at these chapters on your own, if when I sent it to you, you read 13 or 14, you may have been a little confused because it has holes in it. And so we're going to read it together right now. So let me first go into screen share. Here we go. And how do I get rid of this background thing here? I came up with this thing here. I just want to get rid of the background. Thank you. Okay. And I want to see people on the side. All right. Okay, and I'm going to set this for gallery view, and I'm going to ask now, can everybody see the text that's there? If you can, just give me an indication, a thumbs up. And all right, so we're good. Okay. We are going to look at chapter 13, and right from the very first verse, we have a problem. It says in Hebrew, Ben Shana Shaul b'malcho, that Saul was 1 year old when he became king. Now we know that that cannot be true, okay? Because he didn't seem like a 1 year old man looking for his father's donkeys when he became king. It says, Ben Shana Shaul b'malcho, that Samuel became king at 1 year old. Ushtei shanim malach al Yisrael, and he reigned over Israel 2 years, which is impossible on both sides. Number one, he wasn't a 1 year old when he became king over Israel. And number two, all the events that we are going to read in the chapters that we are going to study obviously could not have taken place in a period of 2 years. So let me reinterpret or retranslate this verse for you according to the way it should read. It should read as followed. After Saul initially became king for 1 year before his rule was confirmed. You remember the story I told you that there was an assembly and Samuel introduced the people to King Saul. And originally there were some people who accepted him and some people who said, this is not a king, this is not our king. And you'll remember initially Saul was not accepted by all the people until he fought a battle on behalf of a certain area, a certain tribe in Israel. And after that battle, he was proclaimed king in Gilgal among all the people. The way I would read this sentence is as follows. After his first year reigning as king, when he was subsequently acclaimed by all of the nation, all of the people of Israel, Saul continued to reign for another 2 years until the events that we are about to describe. So actually, Saul was probably about 30 or some odd years old when he became king. After that first year, when he wasn't accepted by everyone, he reigned for another 2 years until such time as the events that we are now about to read occurred. Okay, so let's take a look at what Saul did. Saul picked 3,000 Israelites, of whom 2,000 were with Saul in Michmas, in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. The rest of the troops he sent back to their homes. Okay, what does this mean? Saul is the first leader of Israel, the first Jewish leader to have what we call a standing army. Okay, so before I go on, does everybody know what a standing army is? Do you know what a standing army is? Would someone like to explain what a standing army is? Just raise your hand if you want to tell me what that means. What is a standing army? I'm looking at the people here. Okay, Michael, go ahead. What is a standing army?
It means it's there and ready. They're not at home hanging out with their family waiting to be called up as reserves. They're there, they're ready, probably in barracks.
Yeah, it's what we might call a professional army, not a group of volunteers or draftees, but a regular army. Up until Saul's time, Israel did not have standing armies. When a threat appeared, when the people were confronted with a challenge, what did they do? They sent out messengers to all of the tribes and they said, we've got a problem. We need the tribes to come together to solve militarily the problem. There was no standing army. The soldiers in the Israel army, or in the army of the Israelites, were farmers and workers and regular people who would gather together for a crisis. And when the crisis was over, what would happen? These people would return back to their tribes. They would return back to their lands and back to their occupations. There was no standing professional army. Saul was the first king who said, you know what? Even when there's no military challenge, it's not a good idea to send all the people back. We need to have a regular cadre, a regular group of people who are always available in case of war, who we can call upon, people who are specially trained. And this was Saul's standing army, and it consisted of 3,000 troops. Now, 3,000 troops doesn't sound like a lot of troops, but if you're not fighting continually, if you have a standing army of 3,000 troops, and then in case of a crisis, you're able to mobilize and call upon all the other tribes and people, you can mobilize a lot of civilians. That is a great device. Israel, by the way, works the same way. In Israel, there is a standing army, But if there should ever be a major attack in Israel, if Israel should ever face a major war, and by the way, as I'm mentioning this, happy 74th anniversary. Today is Israel's Independence Day. We're celebrating the 74th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel. If Israel should ever face a crisis, what it has to do is it has to mobilize its citizen army. Every citizen of Israel is supposed to do army service. And in the case of a general mobilization where there's a major war, Israel calls up not only the regular army, but it calls up all of the reserves, all of the citizen soldiers to fight in the major conflict. Well, this is what King Saul did. He had a standing army of 3,000 men, and the rest of the forces, the rest of the people, he says, you go back to your homes, go back to your tribes, live your life. In an emergency, we'll call you, but we don't need you right now. And we see that the army was divided into two groups. Saul had 2,000 of those warriors with him, and his oldest son, Jonathan, had 1,000 soldiers with him. So the army was divided into two parts. 2/3 of the army was with Saul, and 1,000 men were with his son, Jonathan. And they were placed in locations, strategic locations, where, in the case of war, they would be able to respond quickly. So that was the situation. You have an army, and it's ready. Now, what happens? Well, we're told in verse number 3 that it's Saul's son Jonathan who really initiates the war. Let me read to you what it says. Jonathan struck down the Philistine, we would say, governor in Geba, and the Philistines heard about it. What did Jonathan do? The Israelites and the Philistines were still in conflict, and in some kind of an action, apparently, Jonathan, Saul's son, kills the military governor in Geba, okay? And obviously, when the Philistines hear that Jonathan, the son of the king, has slain their representative, has slain their prefect, their leader, their cohort in Geba, when they hear about it, they say, aha, we better go out to war. We better deal with the Hebrews. They see this as a preliminary attack against the Philistines. They prepare for war. Okay, the Philistines heard about it, which meant that they not only heard about it, but they began to gather the Philistine forces to respond to it. The Philistines begin to mobilize their army. Now, not only did the Philistines hear what Jonathan had done, but Saul, Jonathan's father, had also heard what his son had done. His son had attacked and killed the garrison in Geba. It had struck down the leading official there. So what does Saul do? He sounds the ram's horn throughout the land, saying, let the Hebrews hear. The ram's horn is always sounded as an alarm to gather the people for battle. So Saul, recognizing that Jonathan's action has precipitated a war and hearing that the Philistines are mobilizing, Saul sends out word to Israel. He blows the trumpet, he sends out messengers, and he said, gather together, because it looks like we're going to face a military conflict with the Philistines. Okay, now what was the reaction of the people of Israel to Saul's summons? When all Israel heard that Saul had struck down the Philistine prefect, and even though Jonathan did it, since Jonathan was Saul's son, it was assumed that Saul had authorized the action, okay? When Israel heard that Saul had struck down the Philistine prefect, and all Israel had incurred the wrath of the Philistines, all the people rallied to Saul at Gilgal. When the people heard, oh my God, we've struck at a high Philistine official, the Philistines are gathering, they're angry with Israel, they responded to Saul's call by gathering together their military encampment in Gilgal, okay? In other words, Saul begins to mobilize the troops a distance away because the Philistines were coming to the territory of the Hebrews. The Philistines, in turn, gathered to attack Israel. Now, these numbers sound quite amazing. I'm going to read them to you. There's some question as to whether these are exact or whether this was biblical imagery, but I'm going to read it the way it sounds. The Philistines, in turn, gathered to attack Israel. 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen and troops as numerous as the sands on the seashore. They marched up and encamped at Michmas, east of Bet Evan. Okay, now why do I say that that number was probably not a real number. It was probably inflated. Do you know how many chariots Pharaoh had at the time of the Exodus? At least the ones he sent out? 600. It's hard to believe that the Philistines had 30,000 chariots in Israel. First of all, Israel has a lot of mountain country. There would have been no reason for having 30,000 chariots. Chariots only could work on flat land. So I would say it's probably off by at least a factor of 10. You see there's a little F by that. It's probably a footnote saying that that's probably not the actual number. They had a lot of chariots, okay? They had a lot of chariots, and they had horsemen. Now, chariots and horsemen are always good in battle, okay? But they're only good in battle in a certain kind of terrain. What would be the battle terrain? Where would chariots and horsemen have an advantage? What kind of a battlefield would chariots and horsemen have an advantage in? Anybody want to tell me? Yes, I see what you're doing, Paula. She's going like a flatland, right? Chariots cannot fight in hill country. Horses are pretty useless in hill country. And if you've ever been to Israel, you know, especially in the area where the Israelites lived in the hill country, chariots and horsemen would not have helped the Philistines very much. What the Philistines were trying to do was they were trying to cut Israel in half. I won't bore you with the geography, but basically what they were doing is they were coming up the Mediterranean coast. They were trying to pass through the mountains that form the range called Carmel. They were passing a very famous place called Megiddo, and they attempted to enter into the Jezreel Valley to cut Israel in two. They were trying to cut off the north of Israel from the south. And the Jezreel Valley, as Paula indicated, is a very flat terrain, which is excellent for horsemen and chariots. If you're going to have them at all, this would be the broad, flat plain where they would be most effective. So what did the Philistines do in response to the perceived threat by Jonathan and Saul and the Israelites? They called together their armed forces, and they lay a plan to bring the army up to the north, to cut through the Carmel range, and then to sweep down the Jezreel Valley, dividing the north from the south of Israel. So that's their plan, okay? When the men of Israel were now on 5, when the men of Israel saw that they were in trouble, for the troops were hard pressed, the people hid in caves, among thorns, among rocks, in tunnels, and in cisterns. What was the reaction of the Jewish tribes or the Jewish people who were summoned by King Saul when they saw that they were facing this immense force of Philistine cavalry and regular infantry? When they saw this great force, their initial reaction was to hide. It says they hid in caves, among thorns, among rocks, and tunnels and cisterns. In other words, we're not going out to the battlefield to deal with these people. On a plain field, we'll be slaughtered. It would be like the Continental Army or the irregulars trying to fight the British in open warfare on a battlefield. They weren't trained to fight that way. So the people's initial reaction when they see this tremendous response, this forceful response by the Philistines, is to hide. Some of them hide themselves. They don't want to face this kind of a force. But others did something else. Take a look at verse number 7. Verse number 7 states, okay, hold on here. Some Hebrews crossed the Jordan to the territory of Gad and Gilad. Okay, so what did some of them do? They said, you know what, we better get to the other side of the Jordan River. They hit out with the tribes on the east side of the river. They figured the Philistines were going to take everything west of the Jordan. We might as well protect ourselves. And they fled. They crossed the Jordan River, and they joined their co-religionists, their fellow tribesmen. They joined their tribesmen on the eastern shore of the Jordan River, okay? So in essence, both of them were avoiding the battle. Some were hiding to avoid battle, and some of them escaped to the other side of the Jordan to be far away from where the Philistine battle was going to occur, okay? The people that were left, the rest of the people, rallied to Saul in Gilgal. So Saul did not have a lot of forces with him. He was facing a much larger force, and he did not have a lot of men with him. Now, what happens? And you have to imagine this now. Now, this is compressing, and it makes it sound like it's happening in a period of a couple of days. This is not the way mobilizations occur. Okay, we see already in the story of in the accounts of what's happening in Ukraine that a battle that the Russians thought would be over in 3 or 4 days, we're now what, in the 5th week, 6th week, well, more than that. We're going into the 3rd month of the battle. Obviously, it took time for the Philistines to move their forces. Obviously, it took time for the Hebrews to panic. So gradually, the Philistines are moving their forces to the north. The Israelites are panicking, and they're trying to either retreat or hide somewhere else. And in the meantime, Saul is trying to hold on to what army he has, because he knows eventually he's going to have to face this large Philistine force. It's like the Ukrainians facing the Russians. And he has no source of help. There's no one else to help them. It's the Israelite tribes against the Philistines. And Saul knows that for every day the Philistines are preparing for battle, his people are getting more and more frightened and panicking and fleeing. And as the enemy grows stronger, his people are growing more desperate. So he realizes if he's going to join battle, he'd better join battle quickly. He'd better start the conflict quickly. Now, it says here the following, and this is where it becomes a little hard to understand. Saul waited 7 days, he waited 7 days, the time Samuel had set. Now, we don't understand what that means, but I can fill you in because of the commentaries on what it means. When the Philistines began to gather, and Saul realized that a battle was going to occur, he sent word to the prophet Samuel. And he said, the Philistines are gathering against us. There's going to be a battle. We're going to have to go to war. And one of the things you did before you went to war was you offered offerings, sacrifices to God in order to guarantee his favor. So Saul sent word to Samuel and said, listen, my troops are going to go into battle. The enemy is gathering strength. My people are scared. Would you come and meet with us so that we can offer up the proper offerings and then face the Philistines in battle? Perhaps God will be gracious to us and he'll deliver the Philistines into our hands. So Saul and Samuel arranged a meeting time. He gave it a week's time. And when after 7 days' time, when they were supposed to have met, when Samuel did not show up, Saul panicked. He panicked, okay? And what did he do? He was supposed to wait for Samuel. Samuel was the one who was supposed to offer up the offerings. Look what it says. Saul took the initiative and said, verse number 9, bring me the burnt offering and the sacrifice of well-being. And he, Saul, presented the burnt offering. Instead of following the instructions of Samuel, wait for me, wait for 7 days, do nothing until I get there, and then we will offer up the offerings, and then God will be well disposed and you will be victorious in battle. Saul panicked. And without waiting for Samuel to arrive, Saul took the initiative to disobey Samuel's words, which were supposedly spoken by God, and Saul took it upon himself to do what he wanted. Verse number 10. As it turned out, he had just finished offering the burnt offerings when suddenly Samuel arrived. And Saul went out to meet him and welcome him. So what happens? After he takes the initiative, he doesn't listen to Samuel. He offers the offerings himself. No sooner is he finishing the offerings that who should come by but Samuel, okay? Now Samuel is upset because Saul has not followed the instructions that God has given him. And here we have an intimation, a sign as to one of the tragic qualities of Saul. Saul is very impatient. Saul tends to do what he feels he has to do on his own initiative, and he doesn't listen to God. So Samuel arrives, and Saul goes out to welcome Samuel. Samuel said to Saul, what have you done? In other words, Samuel is upset. He sees that Saul hasn't waited for him. He sees that he has taken the initiative and offered the sacrifices himself when it should have been Samuel who did it. And Saul tries to answer him. Saul replied, I saw the people leaving me and scattering. You had not come at the appointed time, and the Philistines were gathering at Michmas. So Saul attempts to justify his actions. Look, I waited for the 7 days, and when you didn't come, and I saw the enemy gathering strength, and I saw my own people getting more and more frightened and beginning to flee, I felt I couldn't wait any longer. I felt I had to take action. And that sounds like a pretty good justification to me. And yet, in a king of Israel who is bidden to follow God's rule, it's the first sign that Saul, in moments of crisis, will not listen to God. He will follow his own counsel. He will make his own decisions. Okay, I thought the Philistines would march down against me at Gilgal before I had a chance to plead before the Lord. So I forced myself to present the burnt offering. In other words, Saul says, when I saw that the Philistines were gathering, I was afraid that they would march against me before the offerings to God could be made. So I forced myself. I took the initiative, and I didn't listen to you, Samuel. I offered the burnt offerings myself. Samuel answered Saul, saying, you have acted foolishly in not keeping the commandments of the Lord, the commandments that the Lord your God has laid upon you. Otherwise, the Lord would have established your dynasty over Israel forever. So Samuel says to Saul, you made a big mistake. Your impatience, your acting foolishly and not heeding God's word has resulted in the fact that you have demonstrated that you are not the worthy representative of your people. Not that anything was going to happen right then and there, but Saul, by this act, you have demonstrated that God will not sustain your kingship. God will not allow your dynasty to continue to remain. And that's what he says in verse 14. Now, your dynasty will not endure. So Samuel gives Saul the unwelcome news that because you failed to heed God's command, I tell you, forget about this current battle. Your impetuousness, your failure to listen to God has resulted in the fact that God will give your kingdom to another. The Lord will seek out a man after his own heart, and the Lord will appoint that man to be ruler over his people because you did not abide by what the Lord had commanded you. So here we see something very interesting. Already in an early battle, in his early kingship, Saul has shown that he is a man who lacks trust, who will do things that he thinks have to be done, even though he is told by authority figures speaking in God's name not to do it. And this is the quality of Saul that is uneven. He is not, as you will see, like some leaders of Israel, faithful to God. He will do what he thinks has to be done. At that point, what does Samuel do? Samuel arose and went up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin. Saul numbered the troops who remained with him, about 600 strong. Okay, so now we are on the eve of the battle. Okay, now remember, this is a long campaign. We see Saul with 600 men. He's about to do battle with forces that are far more numerous than his, okay? You would say to yourself, what, the guy is crazy. He's nuts. He's going to lose. By the way, 74 years ago, you would have said the same thing about the soldiers who were fighting in the land of Israel. When you compared the number of soldiers that Israel was able to field in 1948 in the War of Independence, and you compare it with the combined forces, the Arab forces in the countries that went to war immediately upon its declaration, this is kind of like the battle between Saul and the Philistines. You would have said there's no way that Israel is going to survive. In modern times, the enemies of Israel will push them into the sea. Most countries, most leaders, and even in Western countries said Israel was fighting a losing battle, that by declaring independence and going against Arab forces that were infinitely superior to them in both numbers and in weapons, that Israel was committing suicide. But you will see this is one of the first times in it's not one of the first, but it's one of those times in early Jewish history where a battle is not going to be won by the mighty, the many, the powerful. It's going to be won by the few. And if you'll remember, some months ago, we celebrated the holiday of Hanukkah. And Hanukkah, again, was a war where the few defeated the many, the weak defeated the strong. It seems like if God is on your side, you don't have to worry too much about numbers. If God wants you to win, you're going to win. And Saul's problem was he did not realize that with God's assistance, these other factors did not count. If he truly believed that God was with Israel, and he should have because he was Israel's king, he would not have despaired. But he despaired. He looked at me and said, I've got 600 men. The enemy's got thousands of chariots and thousands of horsemen and people without number. I'm going to suffer a tragic defeat. All right, so now we are ready for the battle. And this next part is very interesting. So here you've got Saul and Jonathan. Saul's numbers have gone down. Jonathan's numbers probably went down as well. Saul and his sons, Jonathan, and the troops who remained with them stayed in Geba of Benjamin, while the Philistines were encamped at Michmas. Now, I could draw you a map, but it's not necessary. The two armies were facing each other on two high places opposite each other. The Philistines were to the north. The Israelite forces were to the south. In between them was a valley, and the valley was where the Philistines hoped the battle would occur, because in flat land, with the advantages of chariots and horsemen, the Philistines would have won an easy victory. Jonathan, the son of Saul, realized that the Israelites could not defeat this enemy in open battle. If they went onto the battlefield, the Philistines would win. So Jonathan had the idea, the only way we can battle them is in the mountains. And the only way we can beat them is if we surprise them and stun them and cause a panic in their camp and get them to flee. If we can get them to panic, if we can get them to flee, if we can, yes, I'm sorry. If we can get them to flee, then maybe we have a chance. Maybe we can take advantage of our knowledge of the hill country and whatnot. Maybe we can take advantage of the environment, and maybe we can defeat the enemy through a surprise, a sudden attack. And so it was that the Philistines come out. I'm going to skip these next few chapters, a few verses. The Philistine raiders came out of the Philistine camp in 3 columns. One column headed for Orphra, the road that leads to the district of Shual. Another column headed for Beth Horon Road. And the third column headed for the border, a road that overlooks the valley of Zeboim toward the desert. In other words, the Philistines split their forces. They divided their forces into 3. They didn't know how few troops Saul really had. So they were trying to protect the north, the east, and the west from attack. At the same time, they were facing the forces of King Saul in the south. So they split their forces and sent parties in different areas. In other words, they broke up their encampment. Now, in addition to not having the same numbers and being deficient in numbers, look at the next part of this, starting at verse 19. No smith was to be found in all the land of Israel, for the Philistines were afraid that the Hebrews would make swords or spears. One of the first things the Philistines had done when they dominated the Israelites was they removed all blacksmiths from the land of Israel. Now, what was the function of a blacksmith? It wasn't so much to shoe horses, because horses weren't, but what did a blacksmith do? A blacksmith would help make or sharpen swords or spears. Now, I don't know how much you know about weaponry, but here's the thing. In battle, you not only need numbers of horses, you need superiority of weapons. The Philistines had not only numbers, they had superior weaponry. They had superior weaponry because they had mastered the technology of iron. They were able to make iron weapons, and the Hebrews were largely still using bronze weapons, which weren't as strong or durable. But more than that, the Philistines had removed from Israelite territory all of the smiths, meaning the people who could sharpen things, so that when a Hebrew needed to sharpen a plow or sharpen some of his other implements, they couldn't do it. They had to go into the land of Philistia and get a Philistine blacksmith to sharpen the weapons for them. In other words, what we're saying is the Israelites had no supply of weaponry, okay? They had their axes and they had their picks, whatever their implements, but they didn't have swords and spears. As a matter of fact, the only part of Saul, only a small number of people in Saul and Jonathan's army actually possessed knives and spears. The majority of them were using farm implements. They were like, using, in the Revolutionary War, using primitive weapons that they had on hand, household items to try and defend themselves. Thus, on the day of battle, no sword or spear was to be found in the possession of any of the troops with Saul and Jonathan. Only Saul and Jonathan had them. So in other words, the only people in the army who had swords or spears or things like that were the leaders, were Saul and Jonathan, probably some other leaders as well, which meant the Jews were outnumbered both in terms of number and in terms of weaponry. It looks like the battle was not going to go well. Now, the Philistine garrison had marched out to the pass of Michmas. Now, here's where chapter 13 ends, and we go to chapter 14. And remember, this all sounds like it all takes place in one time. This was a major battle. It probably took place over probably a period of 6 or 7 or 8 months, but it starts right here. When Jonathan sees the odds are against him, he suggests, I guess, what would be called a Hail Mary pass. He says, you know what? Our only chance for defeating these people is to surprise them. So he comes up with the following plan. Chapter 14. One day, Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the attendant who carried his arms, he called that an arms bearer, come, let us cross over to the Philistine garrison in the other side. But he did not tell his father. So Jonathan, Saul's son, on his own initiative says, you know what? Come with me. We're going to attack a Philistine outpost on the mountains of Michmas. And that sounds like a big deal, but the garrison probably consisted of not more than about 30 or 40 men. It was a small outpost protecting the flank to the north. But remember, the Philistine army was dispersed over a wide area. Okay, so Jonathan decides to take this initiative, but he doesn't tell his father. Now, Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah under the pomegranate tree at Migron, and the troops with him numbered about 600. Okay, so there is Saul with his troops, and he doesn't know what his son is doing. Okay, let's take a look at verse 4. At the crossing by which Jonathan sought to reach the Philistine garrison, there was a rocky crag on one side and another rocky crag on the other. The one was called Bozez and the other Seneh. And by the way, this still exists today. We know actually where this battle took place. In other words, it was a crag and the outpost was guarding the crag. The only way up the crag, you had to climb the mountain, go through the crag in order to get to the Philistine gathering. One crag was located on the north near Michmas and the other on the south near Geba. So Jonathan said to his attendant who carried his arms, he said to his armor bearer, come, let us cross over to the outpost of those uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf, for nothing prevents the Lord from winning a victory by many or few. So this is Jonathan's brilliant idea. You and I are going to attack this 20-man garrison, you and I, and maybe the Lord will give us a victory. His armor bearer answered him saying, do whatever you like, you go first, and I am with you, whatever you decide. So his armor bearer agrees. All right, okay, Jonathan, you're the leader here. You're leading this force of men. Obviously, a large number of men can't go undetected. You want to stage a surprise attack with just you and me. I don't know if there was anybody else. I'm with you. You go ahead. I'll be with you. Jonathan said, we'll cross over to those men and we'll let them see us. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to walk right out of our area, out of the rocks, and we're going to cross the valley and we're going to go up and we're going to start to climb toward them. Okay? We'll cross over to those men and we'll let them see us. If they say to us, wait until we get down to you, then we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, then we will go up, for that is a sign that the Lord is delivering them into our hand. Okay, so what was the idea? Jonathan and his armor bearer start to climb the mountain, and they know that they can be seen by the outpost. He says to his armor bearer, listen, this is what we're going to do. If they say to us, stand down there, because they probably thought maybe they were people who were hiding in the crags, the mountains, whatever. If they stay down there, we'll come to you and see what you want. Then we won't do anything. We'll go back, because obviously they've been prepared. And once they come down to us, there's no way, and they see it's just you and I, there's no way we're going to be able to make our way back up the mountain and to take them by surprise. But if they see the two of us and they taunt us and if they say to us, come up to us, in other words, you rebels, you think you can come on up and let's see what happens to you, that will be our sign. They both showed themselves to the Philistine outpost, and the Philistines said, look, some Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have been hiding. The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his arms bearers, come up to us and we will teach you a lesson. So they see Jonathan, this young man, accompanied by only the armor bearer, and they said, look, this guy's crazy. He's trying to commit suicide. So they say to him, all right, do you think you want to come up to us? Come up to us and we'll show you a thing or two. Then Jonathan said to his arms bearer, follow me. the Lord will deliver them into the hands of Israel. Jonathan is filled with confidence. Jonathan clambered up on his hands and feet, his armor bearers behind him. Now imagine this, they're climbing up the crags, right? The Philistines only see two men. They're not expecting an attack. They figure even if these men are warlike, we can easily handle them. They may have even thought that Jonathan and his armor bearer didn't really have any weapons that would do them any good anyway. Jonathan clambered up on his hands and feet, his armor bearer behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer finished them off behind him. If I were staging this, if I were doing the staging on this, Jonathan comes up over the crag. He surprises the initial outpost. They were the men who were up on this crag. He overpowers them and he slays them, or he at least he debilitates them. And then his armor bearer who follows them finishes them off. So he slaughters the initial group of people. Terror broke out among all the troops, both in the camp and in the field. The outposts and the raiders, I skipped one. The initial attack that Jonathan and his arms bearer made accounted for some 20 men within the space of about half a furrow long in an acre of land. In other words, his attack was sudden. He surprised the enemy, and somehow or other, the two of them managed to kill the 20 men outposts there, okay? Now, the rest of the Philistines didn't know how many men were attacking. They didn't know it was just the two, because Jonathan and his armor bearers surprised them and routed the camp. Terror broke out among all the troops, both in the camp and in the field. The outposts and the raiders were also terrified. The very earth quaked and a terror from God ensued. In the aftermath of this surprise attack, when Jonathan and his armor bearers suddenly kill these men, the Philistines think they're under general attack by the Israelite army. So what do? They flee. They attempt to escape. They attempt to get away, right? And in addition to that, it says the very earthquake. So if God helped, maybe he provided a little earthquake or some other little drama. And so the defeat of the initial outpost causes panic in the Philistine camp. Saul's scouts in Gibeah of Benjamin saw that the multitude was scattering in all directions. Okay, Saul suddenly, he's farther away than Jonathan. He says, look, the Philistines seem to be running away. They seem to be fleeing. Something is going on. Who is doing this? Our forces are here. Who is attacking the Philistines? And he makes a count of his people. He says, is there anybody from the camp who's not here who could be attacking the Philistines? And they take account and they discover that Jonathan and his armor bearer are missing. Okay. Saul suddenly realizes that, yes, there are people missing from the camp. And as hard as it is to believe, it seems that they are causing panic among the Philistines. Okay. Saul can't believe it. He calls upon the priest to verify it. But while he calls the priest, it says, verse 19, while Saul was speaking to the priest, the confusion in the Philistine camp kept increasing. Finally, Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. In other words, Saul was going to ask the priest whether he should attack. But when he saw the Philistines running in terror, he said to the priest, no need to inquire of God. We're attacking. Saul and his troops with him assembled, and they rushed into battle. They found the Philistines in very great confusion, every man's sword turned against his fellow. The Philistines were so panicked that in their panic, they were turning upon each other, okay? We saw this, by the way, in the story of Gideon and his attack of the few men against his enemy. And the Hebrews who had previously sided with the Philistines, those Hebrews who had given up and said, we're never going to beat the Philistines, as well as those who had come with them from the army round about, they too joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. And when all the men of Israel who were in hiding in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they too preceded them. In other words, you saw what was happening. The Philistines suddenly flee. They're not even sure what they're fleeing from. The Israelites, watching this larger army suddenly flee, are convinced that something miraculous is happening. So they join the army, they join the forces, and suddenly large forces of Israelites are now being stirred to courage, and they're attacking the Philistines. Thus the Lord brought victory to Israel that day, the fighting passed beyond Beit Eben. And with that, I'm going to turn us off of this portion of our thing. So hold on here. Let's recap what we were seeing. Let's see. How do I get off of here? Well, Ran, how do I get out of here?
Stop share.
Oh, where is stop share? Well, at the top. Oh, I see it. Got it. Stop share. Sorry. Thank you, Ran. Okay. How many of you have I lost in this process? You still with me? All right. All right. What has just happened here? Okay. And this is the only battle I'm going through with you. What do we learn from this battle? Tell me some of the things we learned from this battle, which was just one battle in a series of battles with Israel, which Israel fought. What do we learn from this battle? Okay, Jerry?
Could I make a comment as well?
Absolutely.
Regarding Saul?
Yes.
In that initially when we met with his first history, he's hiding among the baggage.
Correct.
And he apparently has a fear of losing face in front of people. Can I deduce that much as to why he acts that way?
You can deduce it, and it's a very good insight, Jerry. Saul is afraid of defeat. He only has 600 men. When he sees the Philistine forces, he's so afraid he doesn't obey Samuel, and he offers the offering in his place. He hangs back in the camp. It was Jonathan who took the initiative. It was his son Jonathan who took the daring maneuver that led to the Philistine defeat. Saul is indecisive, and that's another quality of King Saul. Saul is indecisive. When he faces a conflict and he faces an incident which calls for decisive action, Saul always falls back and hesitates, okay? He is not the kind of a man who you would think God, he would believe God is on our side, he will defend us, he will protect us, we will be successful. That is not what happens. Saul, as Jerry indicates, steps back, he hesitates, and he leaves it to his son to provoke the attack. Once Jonathan has created the strategy, once the Philistines start to fall away and flee, then Saul and the rest of the army will join together, and the other Israelites who were afraid, they will join together. So one thing you see is, you see something of the character of Saul. What else do you see from this battle? Jews win conflicts not with superior numbers, not with superior weaponry, not by force of the power of their weapons or the power of their numbers. How do Jews then and now win battles? Go ahead, Leslie.
With their brains and God on their side.
With their brains and God, with their ingenuity. And by the way, the Israeli army today still does it the same way. Audacity and God, okay? You may not have the weapons your enemy has. You may not have the power what enemies have. That means you have to force your enemy to fight on your terms. You have to take the war to the enemy. You have to use psychological warfare to defeat your enemy. This is true from the earliest battles on. The Israelites are successful both because they have developed a very keen battle strategy. They make audacious moves, which are inspired by the faith of the people who make these moves, that God will be with them. And when you are fighting like that, and when you are fighting for your life, that's the other thing. They're fighting for their country. They're fighting for their wives, their children, and whatnot. When you've got to rely on your knowledge of the terrain, when your audacity, taking the initiative to the enemy, that's how you can win battles. I don't know how many of you know this, but George Washington lost most of the battles he fought in the Revolutionary War. Did you know that? Especially battles that were conventional battles against the British their way. George Washington also won in the same way that Jonathan won the battle. Do you remember the first famous battle where Washington wins by surprise? That's your American history. Washington, it looked like the American army was defeated. The British had chased them out of New York, had chased them out of New York all the way down in New Jersey. They had chased them across the Delaware River. On Christmas Eve, Washington was despairing because his army was disappearing. His army, who had enlistments only for the year, many of them said, we can't beat the British. This is a losing war. And he was losing most of his conscripts, most of his irregular army. And he too felt he needed to make a daring move. Do you remember what he did? Anybody? Go ahead, Jerry.
Is this, you're referring to the famous painting of
Yes.
Washington crossing the Delaware?
Yeah. He got in a boat on Christmas Eve with a small number of his forces, and he attacked the Hessian garrison in Trenton, New Jersey. Okay, in a daring early morning raid after Christmas Eve, when many of the Hessian troops were drunk and it was a terrible night, Washington and his forces crossed the Delaware River, came down, attacked Trenton suddenly, took Trenton. And when the British army in Princeton heard about it and came down to catch him, Washington swung up from Trenton and took Princeton, okay? He won it by guerrilla tactics, and he won it by a kind of a decisiveness and a kind of a strategy that said, you know, if we don't strike now, we lose it all. This is in essence what Jonathan and the tribes of Israel did. And here's what I want to impress upon you. The armies at that time of Israel were not stronger than their enemies. And we're going to conclude here in just a moment. Their enemies were more than them. They were better organized than them. If they won these battles, which they did, they won it through audacity, they won it through knowledge of the terrain, and they won it, as all of us who are religious people believe, with the help of God. If they thought they couldn't have done it, if they quavered, they would have lost. But because they believed they could do it, and you remember the story of the spies in the wilderness, remember, who didn't think they could take the land. The only thing that keeps us from winning decisive battles is our own fear, our own lack of belief in ourselves. If we see ourselves as insignificant grasshoppers, if we see ourselves as defeated, then we have lost the battle before it begins. The wars that were fought by King Saul over the 20 years of his reign, and there's no need to go into any more of the battles, but he fought against the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Amalekites, the Philistines, the Edomites. Over the course of 20 years, Saul fought battle after battle. How did he win? He won because of good strategy. He won because, as the Israelites defeated one enemy, they retreated from the field for a time, which now enabled Saul to turn to the next enemy. So at the end of 20 years, even though he had not defeated them, he had managed to bring 20 years of relative stability to the life of the Jewish people. He had kept the enemy from overcoming the Israelites. He had bought the country 20 years. Neil, I think I saw your hand. You're still muted, Neil. There you go.
Okay. I'm just trying to make sure. You just made a statement that he, through strategy and belief, we won battles. Wasn't the first one, though, his son's strategy?
Wasn't the first one?
His son's strategy?
Yes, it was his son's strategy.
So,
That is
did he have the strategy for the other ones, or did his son?
This is the only battle where we hear that Jonathan took the initiative. My own belief is that as Saul became more resolute and as he began to win battles, he slowly assumes the self-confidence that he lacks in the early stages of battle. This was Saul's first major battle. He had fought a couple years earlier in the attack against the Ammonites, you know, that sudden attack. But in the face of the large Philistine armies, I believe, Neil, Saul panicked. I believe he suddenly became afraid and indecisive. And it took a younger man, a rash man, a man like, well, not a rash man, but a bravado like his son Jonathan, who really believed, who said, we can do this, we can take it. Jonathan provided, at that first decisive battle with the Philistines, provided the victory that eventually enabled Saul to gain the confidence he gained as king to win the battles that were to follow. Okay? So that's my answer to you. Yes, the initiative came from Jonathan. Yes, Saul himself seemed to be indecisive in that battle. But the result was that as the battles progressed and as Saul slowly gained victories over one enemy after another and saw that God was in fact with Israel and that victory wasn't dependent upon numbers or weaponry, but dependent upon other things, he suddenly assumes or develops the confidence that he will show later on.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Jerry.
I can kind of picture this with these Philistines sitting up in the mountain and then peering over the precipice. And they're said, yeah, okay, come on up here. And they probably drop down and they're laughing and go back to casting their dice or
Mhm.
dinner. And all of a sudden, Jonathan climbed the top and he's jumped on him.
He
So-
jumped. Yeah. Now, obviously, Jonathan must have been quite a soldier, but Philistines, what are they going to worry about? Two men climbing up a rock to attack him? By the way, if we're casting this, I say we cast Mel Gibson as Jonathan, even though I don't particularly care for Mel Gibson. In his role as what was he? What was the name of the movie he played? Braveheart. What was that? What was the character's name?
William Wallace.
William Wallace. Yeah, I can picture. I can picture him. I can picture him coming over the top, and killing men left and right and causing a panic in the camp. This is what I think. Probably, I think you're right, Jerry. I think the Philistines took very lightly the threat of these two men, and when they actually came upon the camp and were prepared, they had the advantage of surprise, and they managed to cause a panic in the Philistine camp. But you see now the miracle of survival in the wars that Israel has fought. Israel has always been outnumbered. In the Six-Day War, which we will celebrate in another few weeks, Israel was attacked by countries on three sides. Not only did they manage not to lose, they managed to win in 6 days. If you had told the Jewish people on the eve of the Six-Day War that not only weren't they going to lose thousands and thousands of people in this war where Nasser and Hussein and the others threatened to wipe them out, that they would win the war, that they would capture 3 times the amount of territory of the current size of Israel, and that they would do all this in 6 days, no one would have believed it. It sounds like stuff of legend, but that's exactly what happened. So these stories do come true. I mean, when you're dealing, David Ben-Gurion said, in Israel, how did he put it? In Israel, if you don't believe in miracles, you're not a realist. That's what he said. In Israel, if you don't believe in miracles, you're not a realist. In other words, when it comes to the history of Israel, if you discount miracles, you're not dealing with the reality, because the truth is that a large part of the history of Israel is concerned with these seemingly miraculous events. All right, now, I have covered everything because the very last part of the text, which I did not read to you, after this battle scene, they describe this one battle, and you're supposed to extrapolate from it. This is the first battle. This was the first big battle, but they don't describe the battles that follow. They merely tell you the following. At the very end of chapter 14, it says the following. So Saul took the kingdom over Israel and fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, against the children of Ammon, against Edom, against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines. And wherever he went, he accounted himself well and put his enemies to flight. And he did valiantly and smote the Amalekites, and he delivered Israel out of the hands of all his enemies. So you get one battle scene, you get this one battle, and then we don't get the details of all the other battles. But what you're led to believe is that in this first battle that the Israelites won against seemingly impossible odds, Saul managed over the 20 years of his being king to duplicate the same kinds of situations, conditions, which enabled him to hold his enemies at bay. Next week, you're going to see the event that causes Saul to lose divine support and causes Samuel the prophet to say to Saul, you have been rejected now as king over Israel. God has chosen someone else in your stead. And this will mark the decline and the fall of King Saul. So this is what you will get to see in next week's session. Next week, we've covered tonight chapters 13 and 14. Next week, we will cover chapters 15 and 16. Especially make sure you read chapter 15, which talks about what it was, the tragic, we've talked about it already, the tragic quality, the tragic problem in Saul's nature that causes him to lose the kingship of Israel. We've already said he is impatient, he is hasty, he makes decisions without considering what God wants. And we have also seen that he is hesitant when he has to be decisive. And we've seen how all those have come to play. You are going to see that all those factors will come into play next week when he loses his kingdom to his arch rival, to King David. Okay, we'll talk about that. Okay, anybody else? Any further questions? All right, go back now. Hopefully when you read the text, it will make more sense to you. Generally speaking, the portions that come after this are easier to understand than today's portion. Today's portion had a lot of ambiguities, and it dealt with geography and it dealt with battle tactics. And if you don't have a background in those kinds of things, it may have been hard to follow what was going on. But this reads like real history. I have to tell you, by the way, just one last story and then I'm done. I told you that the place where this battle took place exists in Israel today. A battle took place at that same site, almost 3,000 years after David's time. In World War I, the British were fighting in Palestine. True story. They were fighting the Turks, and the Turks were on this mountain, the very mountain that the Philistines were on, the very mountain on Michmas that the Philistines held. And the British didn't know how to go up and to dislodge them from the mountain because the area was very secure. And a British officer, I'll get you the information and send it to you, a British officer who was a Bible scholar remembered reading this story in the book of Samuel. And he identified the location from the geography of the area. And he and a small party actually went up the same crag, found the area, the vulnerable area, and led the British troops through it, and they drove the Turks out of the area. So this same tactic that was used by Jonathan about the year 1020 BCE was used by the British in 1917 to drive the Turks out of the same area. Okay, I'll send you the account. It is a miraculous modern story, and it shows you that the same realities of the Bible then, because they were understood by a biblical scholar who served in the British Army, a British officer, were employed to defeat the Turks 3,000 years later. So you couldn't write this stuff. All right, everybody. I will see some of you on Monday. Neil, go ahead.
You brought up you couldn't write this stuff. Actually, I may want to take it offline, but everybody can decide whether they want to stay on or not. We had gone to wasn't a Bible study, it was a biblical study. Mm-hmm. And so they were talking about Exodus and how millions of people couldn't move as fast as they said, because they looked at it from a military standpoint of how many people could go, how far, if they were five wide, and yet you're going through the crevices and everything like that, so you couldn't be 5 wide. So there was a lot of this applying logic to stuff that kind of shoots hole in the story. Is that kind of what you're talking about in this here?
It's part of what I'm talking about. The truth is that sometimes calculations or estimations are just plain wrong. If any of you have ever seen the movie Lawrence of Arabia with Peter O'Toole, there is a point where Peter O'Toole and his Arab army with Faisal decide they're going to attack a coastal community called Aqaba. And they're going to try and attack Aqaba, not from the water side where it was well defended. They're going to try and cross the Nufud Desert in Saudi Arabia. And someone says it can't be done. The Nufud cannot be crossed. No people can do it. Well, Lawrence and a group of Bedouin did exactly that. They crossed from the Nefut using camels, the sand ships of the Arabian desert. They attacked and defeated Aqaba from the eastern side because the Turks had no way of knowing that they would attack from that area. They assumed that they were impregnable. So sometimes, Neil, what we think about as being impossible isn't really impossible at all. Today, part of the problem with troops moving, as the Russians are discovering, has to do with supply lines. Your troops can move at a certain pace, but unless you move up your auxiliaries and your supply lines, you can't keep those troops supported, right? So it doesn't matter how fast the troops move. It takes a while to move into your positions. Sometimes having a military force isn't the fastest way to traverse an area. Sometimes, as you say, knowing the back roads, the inroads, the wadis, the special areas can provide you victory where you don't think it's possible.
Well, and again, you start to think about it, and I'm not trying to disprove anything, but just the logic of moving 2.5 million people versus moving, what was it? How many Egyptians was it? 600,000?
How many Egyptians were there in Egypt at the time of the Exodus?
Yeah.
Millions, millions, and millions.
No. That came after them.
The Egyptians who came after them were a small force compared to the number of Hebrews that were actually fleeing.
Yeah, so couldn't they move faster than the?
They could move faster, unfortunately, and they started moving after they thought the Hebrews were caught by the Red Sea. Unfortunately, for them, the pillar of cloud divides them from the Israelites and prevents them from attacking right away, giving the Israelites the time that they need over the Red Sea safely. By the time the pillar of cloud, by the time the environment changes so that the Egyptians can move, the Hebrews have already successfully crossed. There's a miracle involved in that one.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so everybody, we will send you this recording. We'll send you the material. I will send you that clip on the British officer. Do read it, because once you read it, you will be absolutely stunned. His name is on my lips, but there was a special series done about the history of Israel. And this was episode number 1, showing you how modern Israel, a miracle from 3,000 years ago, was duplicated in modern times. So read it and enjoy it. And I will see you all next week. Leslie?
No, it's just saying goodbye.
Oh, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. And those of you who are still on from Or Kadash, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, at our new meeting place. Okay, go ahead. Okay. And I'm staying online.
Correct.
Huh?
Right. You're
Right.
correct.
All right,
Yeah.
we'll be there. See you then, fellas.
Okay.
Okay, all right. And then there were 3. I'm not sure you know, Ray, you see Joey and Lindsay up there?
Yes, I do.
And that is my brother Gary's son and his daughter-in-law.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And Ray is my cantor for many years. I don't know, you guys weren't at high holiday services, but for, oh God, 20 some odd, more than 20 some odd years, first here at Beth Shalom in Santa Clarita, and then in Or Kadash when we were meeting in the North Valley. Ray and I were cantor and rabbi for all those years. And when I retired, going on 3 years now, and it's almost 3 years, I left.
You left me behind. Yeah.
I left you behind.
Yeah.
I did offer to take you, but you said no. We needed someone to stay and hold the ship together, and Ray has done that. So formal introduction. By the way, if you ever need an accountant, Ray is first rate. He's also my accountant in addition to my.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my plug. How are you? You're welcome to stay if you want. I'm going to visit with Ray. I haven't seen Ray since you and Ronnie went to New York for your anniversary, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Yeah, it really was. The weather turned out to be better than we expected it to be. And we had virtually one morning of drizzle. The rest of it, the sun was out, everything was great. So it was really nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. And how many days were you there?
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So
And which
5.
hotel, where in the city did you stay?
Stayed at the Essex House.
Oh,
Are you
very
guys
nice.
leaving?
The Essex,
Are you
you
waving?
guys, bye, Joey, bye, Lindsay. Talk to you soon.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
But Ray, we need an accountant, so we might be in
Do-
touch.
do- Oh, all right. Seriously, he is very, very good.
Heck
Ray,
yeah. Do
They
you have
do
like
need
an
an
email?
accountant, so I'll give them your information.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
He really, really is good. I mean, you got to trust your car mechanic, your accountant, and your doctor. Everyone else in life,
Yeah.
but your CPA, your mechanic, and your doctor, you got to have absolute trust. Then you live a good life.
I love that.
I'll send you guys the information.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
You're
Absolutely.
Thank
Nice
you.
meeting you, Ray.
You're welcome. Good night.
Bye.
At the Essex House, is by Central Park, isn't it? Right
Yeah,
up 59th Street
Yeah.
or something?
59th and
nice.
between 6 and 7.
That's right.
Right around the corner from Carnegie Hall. It was
Oh, it's
wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Essex House is
Really
one of
nice.
the Plaza Hotel. These are the great grand dames of hotels.
Yeah, yeah. So we had a ball. We walked all over the place.
Right.
But, we saw 3 shows. So, and it was a lot of fun. We really had a good time.
Is
So,
Broadway back?
yeah, pretty much. I mean, we went to the opening night for this show that our client is in. It was their 4th opening night. The last one, they opened March 5th, 2020. No, that was the 3rd one. The 3rd one. They had opened off Broadway, they opened on Broadway, shut down, then they opened again and shut down, and then, yeah, this was the 4th, so.
Which show is this, by the way?
Girl from the North Country,
Oh, I've heard of
so-
it. Yeah.
written by, it's mainly Bob Dylan songs.
Oh,
Is the
okay.
music, which we didn't know, but it's a dark story. It's 1930 something in Duluth, Minnesota.
Oh,
And
was it a musical?
Yeah, but dark, but I mean, it was a little dark. It's not something we would have gone to see if he wasn't in it,
Hmm.
but it was great. It was really good. We saw Mrs. Doubtfire.
Oh, very
which
good.
was wonderful. Our client wrote this book and the music. It was terrific. And we saw Billy Crystal in Mr. Saturday Night.
Oh, yeah.
So it was wonderful.
He has a singer there. Heard him in one of this woman singer who was just like unbelievable. I forget what her name was.
So there was Eileen Graff played his wife and Shoshana Bean played his daughter.
I think that was the one. Yeah.
Shoshana Bean had played Elphaba and Wicked various times, and it was great. It really was. So we had a good time.
Oh, good. All right. And you probably ate a lot of good restaurants.
Well, we're on a crazy diet again. So we had dinner. We had dinner at Del Frisco's for our anniversary. It wasn't so good. We were really disappointed. But we had dinners Monday night at the Capitol Grill that made up for it. So,
Very good.
and we had lunch one day, or actually on Saturday, we had lunch in Little Italy. So that was fun. Otherwise, we walked around. I mean, we walked all over the place. So.
Oh, well, you're in good shape. Both of you are in good shape. And New York is a walking town.
Oh, yeah.
And subway town.
Yeah, it worked out really well. So
Yeah.
I wanted to go to shul Friday night because it was my mom's Yorkshire Sunday,
Right.
but we had theater tickets, so
Oh, all right.
but that was the only time we could go, and that was the only time we could see him. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, which anniversary is it? This is a big one, wasn't it?
yeah,
What is
50.
it, 50? 50. Well,
Yeah.
happy anniversary.
Thank you.
That's really, really nice. And
Yeah,
things were okay with the congregation when you got back? Everything good?
seems to be.
But
Seems.
weekend, I think. Isn't it, is it Woody?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're not coming tomorrow night, so we're just doing Friday night without them.
Okay.
And Saturday, she'll do what she does. It's not a lot, but
Okay.
I
All right.
don't know. It is what it is. I'm virtually giving up. So it's gonna be-
Virtually get, what does that mean? Virtually giving?
if they're not, if the families don't care more than I do, then
You
I'm
can't
not
want
gonna
it
care.
more than them.
I'm not gonna care more than they do.
No.
So, it'll be
Okay.
fine.
Yeah, you got Cooper coming up. She's pretty good.
Lopreet's in the middle. Lopreet's
Oh,
in 2
Lopreet, right.
weeks.
Mhm.
From what Brina says, he's not gonna even get through his Haftorah. So,
Okay.
yeah, and she's working as best she can, and there's no, but Cooper should be really nice.
All right.
She's good.
And then I
So-
think you've got a couple in May, and then Ben Siegel brings it to an end in June.
That's it. Cooper, Lopreet, Cooper, and then Ben Siegel.
Oh,
on
Ben is the
11th
last
June.
of them. Okay, okay.
Yeah, until, I don't know, there's Molly Rose, there's a few, then August.
Uh-huh.
In August. The Rubens, two knuckleheads, it's gonna be really interesting. Nia Brand and Rowan Krieger
Yeah.
are together, and Jackson Goodman's in July.
Oh, okay.
And then we've got a Gimmel kid that's in between before Sam McCloy, like November the 5th or 6th.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna miss both his and McCloy's that week because I'm gonna be in Florida for baseball camp.
Oh,
So, But
what's happening with the high holidays? Are you and Dina music down?
yeah, I've got, in fact, I just talked to Kara. It'll be similar, but I've got, we're gonna start working. I've got Brooklyn
Yeah.
and Ellie Cooper gonna sing with me. on
Oh, very
different-
nice.
Different.
And
music.
Ronnie, I assume again, and
Ronnie will do, yeah, we may incorporate Brooklyn in with Kara and Ronnie.
Okay.
singing The Lador Vador. Why, we'll get you a chair to stand up. So we'll see, but we're gonna start working on it, so,
good. All
as far
right.
as I know, yeah.
You have time. You've
Yeah.
got, you've got, you don't have a heavy list of bar bat mitzvahs over the summer, so it's not like you're going to be working on doing pictures or those kinds of things
Yeah,
for the summer.
that's it. So,
Good, good.
what's going on with you guys?
What's going on with us guys? Well, believe it or not, we booked a cruise today.
Yeah, when, where?
Yeah, I mean, we got something from Oceania.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Oceania, yeah.
yeah, and we called and they booked it, and they had like a 2-for-1 kind of a thing. So it's from, let me see if I remember. It's from, yeah, I know where April 24th to May the 4th. It's about
No,
10 days. It's
next year,
next year, to 2023.
oh, next year.
Yeah,
Okay.
next year, oh, not this year, 2023. This year, we're going to go up to up to Vancouver to see the kids for a bit.
Yeah,
So it starts in Barcelona, goes down, we see Barcelona, Valencia, so a little bit of Spain. Then it goes through, Monaco and Saint-Tropez and whatnot. It ends in Rome. And then the trip we never got in Rome.
yeah,
Stops at a couple Italian ports. It stops at Florence and Pisa. It ends in Rome, and we'll end the trip in Rome. So,
nice.
the cruise is 11 days. If Rome is 5 or 6 days, it'll be like a 2 weeks or something
Nice.
trip.
That's nice.
Yeah,
So yesterday we booked almost the same cruise,
you're kidding.
leaving June 25th this year, next month.
This year,
Yeah, leave Barcelona to Valencia, Ibiza, Portofino,
yes, yes.
Florence, Corsica, and we
Oh,
end up
wow.
in Rome.
Which line?
Celebrity,
Celebrity, very nice.
yeah.
Nice.
And it's the same ship Ronnie and I were on last November.
How
in
many
the
people
Caribbean.
on the ship? You really know how?
2,200, I think, or
Yeah.
no, but maybe 2,200, 2,300. It's not a big ship.
No, we went smaller too. We went with, our ship is 1,200. I mean,
Okay,
it's 1,200.
nice.
But it has the feel of a bigger ship. So it doesn't feel like a small ship, but it doesn't have all the extra people.
Sure. Yeah. Well, very nice. That's cool.
Yeah, no, I know. We've been talking about doing this a long time, and COVID this and COVID that. And this year, of course, we're going up to be with the kids and to be there for our grandchild and
How's she doing?
Doing good, actually doing very, very good. They call us once a week. We talk to them once a week. We usually speak to them on Friday. And she's doing good. She had some initial morning sickness, but she's been doing well. They're both teaching at the school, so that's going along well. I think they want to spend one more year there. If they have their druthers, they'd like to have 2 years on their resume. I don't think will be teaching because of Canada's rules. She's going to get a nice 7 or 8 month paid leave.
Nice.
So she won't have to teach, and she'll get paid for paid leave. But they want to teach, and then I'm hoping to bring him down here. I mean, that would be my goal.
The baby's due in a couple months, right? It's
The baby is
relatively
due
soon.
July the 12th.
What I thought.
Yeah, we're scheduled to fly
Exactly.
up on the 10th. And assuming they're not early in 8 days till the bris, we want to be there for the bris, obviously.
Sure.
And it's kind of open-ended. We left ourselves about 2.5 weeks from the 10th of what, and if we have to, we'll change. If it doesn't work out right, we'll stay over what we have to stay.
Sure. Great.
But anyway,
Very nice.
it's going very, very well. And, he had a good experience with the last thing he did. And Eddie, well, you saw Eddie. Eddie was,
Yeah.
Eddie,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it was very good.
yeah, no, I know. So I'm very happy with that. So what we're going to do is over the summer, instead of these multi-session courses, I'm trying to now arrange some special speakers. I'm trying to arrange like 3 or 4 special speakers over the summer on the line of an Eddie. And then maybe some special topical things, 1 shots or maybe most 2 shots. So
Yeah.
if people are going on vacations or whatnot, we don't have to depend upon, weeks and weeks.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, we'll see what happens afterward.
How are Marilyn and Dalt?
Dalt is good. We have a talk with the gerontology department tomorrow. I mean, he's still has his appetite. I would say he's 90% gone, meaning he still recognizes us and whatnot, but you can't understand him anymore and
Yeah.
different place. And he gets up and he wanders in the night. I mean, he has good caregivers. That's the good thing.
Yeah.
As they sold the building, they have us enough that he can go for another 2 years or so. So there's that. He's
Okay.
going to be, near to Hashem, God willing, 99 in September. And there's a shot
Wow.
he might actually do it. So, who knows? But he's doing good. Obviously, we're buying lots of big trip insurance because with Marilyn and my dad, if God forbid something happens,
Yeah, for sure.
we don't want to be caught. So
And Marilyn?
Marilyn is okay. She is, goes to her regular appointments, does her thing. They did see, like they said, seen something at one point, but nothing that anybody's worried about in particular.
What's with the lawsuit?
The lawsuit is an interesting thing. She was served.
Yeah.
And what they're asking for, what they want to, they want to provide for their mother to have long-term care in case she can't. Right now, they live with their mother. Huh? Long-term home care.
Yeah.
So how much it costs my dad. So
Yeah.
but basically what they want is they want to make as much money as they possibly can for it. Based on what Rob said, his information and what the lawyer for our insurance company says is that they'll probably end up settling. They're trying to go in asking for a lot. But based on some information we gave them and whatnot, they think they'll probably end up settling.
The insurance company will settle.
The insurance company and the family, they'll both settle. In other words, the family will come down and the insurance company.
Yeah, that's what I mean, but it's
Yeah.
not going to come back. at
Oh,
Marilyn.
no. They're telling us we probably don't have it. If it comes to that and they think there's a problem, they'll let us know so we can engage someone ourselves.
Yeah,
I am so off.
yeah.
See, this is the danger of my speaking on behalf of my wife. Why was I so off? I thought I did a pretty. The insurance company's hiring the lawyer? Oh, the insurance company is representing Maryland.
Right, yeah, I
Yeah.
got that.
But if, for example, the insurance company settles with them and it's not, or if the insurance company says, this is what we're covering and we can't cover,
Yeah, and they want
Maryland-
more and they think they can try and get more, then you gotta
then,
get.
then we
another-
would have to have our own lawyer.
Of course, I got it.
So right now, it's going, that's going along. We're not too worried about that. And otherwise, everything else, thank God, is going okay.
You're not supposed to be driving. Yeah,
Yeah, Maryland's
Good.
not driving, yeah.
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 Come on, Murphy. What do
Okay.
you want?
Very good. So
All right.
otherwise, you guys are okay?
Yeah, both of us are doing good, thank God. Mother's Day is going to be small key this time, just family. We're just gathering on Sunday here, and we're doing brunch instead of, Randy usually does a dinner, but it's easier. We have, white fish and other thing. We'll just do like some brunch thing and it'll be easy.
The kids are taking us to Castaways in Burbank.
Oh, very
for
nice.
Mother's Day for our anniversary,
Which is where.
which is where we got married. So,
Ways up in the valley on top of the, yeah.
yeah, in Burbank, yeah.
I've
yeah.
been there in a long time. I think this is Matt Gould or Becca Gould's bat mitzvah or something. And some,
Could be, yeah, we were there. We were there for Danny and for Natalie and Vanessa Maya's bat mitzvah party,
oh, very
but,
nice.
which is a couple of years ago now, but.
Right. Oh, Randy tells me I'm wrong again. We were there for Rebecca Zayon's wedding.
We knew it was Rebecca somebody,
I knew,
Yeah.
I knew what it was.
so, but yeah, so that's nice, because they
Yeah.
weren't, obviously, they couldn't be with us for our anniversary. So.
Well, decide where you guys want to go. We still have a dinner to do together. So decide where and when would work for you. I assume that things are getting a little bit easier now in your schedule.
Yeah, yeah, we're opening up. So.
All right. So wherever it is, it can be dinner. If you want to rather do brunch.
Sure.
The place we discovered, you've probably already gone to it, but for brunch, we like it, have you ever been to Joffrey's in Malibu?
Not for years and years and years and years and years.
Yeah, it's
So,
a very beautiful,
yeah.
it's a very
Yeah.
beautiful place. And
Oh, yeah.
so if something like that, and we could do it later too, but it's a beautiful, like brunch, a special brunch setting. They have all kinds
Yeah.
of wonderful. So decide what you want to do, how.
We will. We'll figure it out.
Okay, all
For
right.
sure.
All right, well, I'll be watching you, I guess, on Saturday.
Okay.
On
We'll be back.
line.
We'll be back with you on Monday. So,
All right.
we'll
well,
try and tune in.
All right. Glad to hear that you had a wonderful
It was great. Thank you.
anniversary. And
It was really good.
that's the way to celebrate. By
Yeah.
the way, on this cruise that you're planning, who's going?
Just Marani and I.
Oh, just you and Ronnie.
Yeah, we planned on Phil and Heather and Arthur going, but on a different cruise. But Arthur is likely to be selected to the Little League All-Star team. And
Really?
likely to be tied up in All-Stars for a while. We don't know how long, because as soon as they lose, they're done. But Phil and Heather couldn't make plans, so.
I had no idea that he was,
He's been playing really, really well. He's playing with 12-year-olds and 11-year-olds pretty much, but he's dominating pitching. He's the most consistent. There's only 4 teams, but he's the most consistent pitcher in the league. And he's limited to, I don't know, 60 pitches, I think, in one game, but he pitches 3 or 4 innings every. They didn't have a game this week. They play again on Saturday, so I'll go right from Temple to the game. Ronnie has a baby shower. Easy there. Ronnie has a baby shower for Elisa Cooperman.
oh, Lucy Cooper, been right. Yeah.
So yeah, they usually play like a weekday and Saturday. So he's been pitching twice a week, and he's really, really good.
Cohen
So
family tradition.
you know what? I said to Ronnie, he is better at 10 years old than Phil or Rob was.
Really?
And I think because because the coaching that he's had is so much better. Not from the outside coaches, but from Phil and from me. He takes it like a sponge. He's really, really good at learning,
Are all the games
And he
played on
loves it.
Saturdays?
mostly.
All right.
During the
Tell me-
weekend, Saturday.
All right, well, tell me maybe during one, I'd like to see him. Obviously, Saturday's going to be a problem for me, but
I
I'd love,
think he plays, there's a weekday game next week, probably Tuesday. I'll look.
all right, let me know. I would love to see him pitch.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah, all right.
I'll let you know. You could come
All right.
over here, we can go together. It's out in Canyon Country, out past the backwoods inn,
Okay,
on Sierra Highway.
all right,
That'd be fun.
I would like that.
Cool.
One last thing, I didn't check with Eddie, but I assume everything is all taken care of and you sent the check and everything and he's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Okay. Probably a day or two.
But Tuesday, I think when we got back, I
When you
sent it
got
out.
back.
It probably went out yesterday.
That's fine.
No, Can't be. May have gone out Tuesday, or no, yesterday, I think.
Yeah, that's
But
fine.
yeah, it went out.
Perfect. All right.
Yeah.
Listen, take care. Welcome back.
Thank you. You guys too.
Thank you, and we'll
All
talk
right, we'll
soon.
see you. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.